Hope my voice is clear. Screen तो clearly visible होगी. आवाज आ रही है कि नहीं आ रही सबको? What about the voice, people? Was as we were discussing in the first chapter of economic survey. The first thing that we discussed about the global context within which we are right now, in which we talked about global economic growth, how much it was in the previous financial year, similarly global fiscal deficit, as well as other global conditions. Then we talked about how our economy is faring. Yeah? Okay. And in that section, we discussed how Indian economy is so much resilient. And we alluded all those arguments on the basis of what Indian economy's macroeconomic indicators are telling us. So Indian economy's macroeconomic indicators we were discussing, apart from fiscal deficit, private, fixed capital formation and all those things. So if you see this non-debt capital receipts, which we discussed in the previous class, three things we need to discuss. That 3.9 lakh crore was the receipts between this time period as against the target of 4.3. Usually the 6 lakh ka target tha. But you can imagine what was the ideas. Then we is also saw that Ministry of Road Transport, Highways is also there, which talked about, these two ministries are responsible for 97,000 crores worth of proceeds in this previous financial year, which collected 1.6 lakh crores. These things we discussed previously. And apart from that, NHAI thinking about 33 assets to be monetized in the current financial. So this is what the idea is. Okay. Then now we will start from what are the trends in the central government's capex. Capital expenditure में क्या trend चल रहा है? That's what we're gonna discuss in, from here onwards in today's class. So capital expenditure, all of you understand that in the class also we discussed that capital expenditure is essential in context of increasing the productive capabilities of a economy. It is clear to everyone. So central government has been consistently doing capex since the pandemic, and this is also one of the strategy that we discussed at the start of the chapter. And why it is important for descriptive? Because we are discussing about the trend of capital expenditure from public to private. Because as you see, public capital expenditure year on year is declining. Even though you think the growth rate is declining, absolute value is still increasing. And because the growth rate is declining, the government is asking private sector to join us and do capital expenditure in the economy. So that's what the broad trend is. And again, what else are we going to see here? So you can see the total expenditure declined to 15% of GDP from earlier 17.7%. And this is we're talking about total expenditure, in which capital expenditure stood at 9.5 lakh crores, a figure which we need to remember, which even though is a very huge number, represents 28.2% increase from the previous financial year. And this survey also told us that what's the government focus with respect to capital expenditure is कि government capital expenditure पे अगर सोच रही है तो किस हिसाब से सोच रही है. What are the broad themes with respect to government's capital expenditure? So the first thing, as all of you anyways understand, the government capital expenditure is being done in those different sectors where which we can reduce logistical bottlenecks and increase productive capabilities or productive capacities of the economy. So this is the first thing कि सरकार उन सेक्टर में इन्वेस्ट कर रही है जिसके थ्रू हम लोग लॉजिस्टिकल बॉटलनेक्स को कम कर सके। लॉजिस्टिक्स में जो जो दिक्कतें आती है, कॉस्ट बढ़ा हुआ है लॉजिस्टिक्स का, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन में दिक्कत है, वो सब कम हो जाए बिकॉज ऑफ गवर्नमेंट के एक्सपेंडिचर से। और दूसरी चीज की इकोनॉमी में लोगों का प्रोडक्शन करने का जो स्पेस है वो बड़ा हो जाए, सो दैट दे कैन प्रोड्यूस मोर इन द इकोनॉमी। सो दैट्स द फर्स्ट थीम इन कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर। व्हाट इज द नेक्स्ट थीम? अब क्योंकि सरकार रोड में इन्वेस्ट कर रही है, बिकॉज द गवर्नमेंट इज इन्वेस्टिंग इन रोड्स, railways, all these things are reducing logistical costs. So when in the whole economy your logistic cost has been reduced, that means your input cost has been reduced. So the companies which were thinking about expanding their plants, they now can expand because now the cost is reduced. Okay, they'll be much more profitable if they increase and if they do much more capital expenditure. So because of public expenditure or public capital expenditure, this is also crowding in private capex, because government did, and which reduced logistic cost and all those things, which included or give the reason for private sector to much more invest. That's why even private capital expenditure has also arrived. That's what the second idea is. What's the third idea in Government of India's capital expenditure theme? Is providing grants to states for creation of capital assets. This everybody understands कि we provide money to states so that they can build something which increases their productive capabilities or which reduces their logistical cost and all those things. So that's what the grant is all about. So these are the three themes. I hope this is clear to all of you. किसी को कोई दिक्कत in understanding these three themes? I hope you guys will be able to write these three themes whenever a question with respect to government's capital expenditure will come. ये तीन चीजें तो आप आराम से लिख ही सकते हो, apart from obviously you remembering these values. Then next thing is, and if you see government's capital expenditure economic survey में आपको दे रखा है एक टेबल, बहुत बड़ा सा टेबल दे रखा है, and if you just look at what are the three sectors in terms of absolute value who have received more capital expenditure from the government of India is road transport, railways and defense services. And if you check the growth rate from the previous financial year to this financial year, किसका growth rate ज्यादा है? तो आपको मिलेगा कि railways में ज्यादा है, then transfer to states and then defense civil. So please remember these top three sectors in context of absolute outlay and in context of growth from 23 to 24. Very much important for objective purpose. Next is capital expenditure, time for private sector to take the baton. So basically simple सी बात है, and this has been recurrent theme. Again in current affairs we have been discussing this again and again and again and again, that even the chief economic advisor is saying private sector to come and lead from the front in terms of capital expenditure. Even the finance minister talked about the same in the parliament as well as in the the forums, public forums. तो इकोनॉमिक सर्वे में कैसे नहीं आएगा? मैंने आपको इकोनॉमिक सर्वे में पहले ही बोला था कि जो भी चीज आप लोगों ने पूरे साल भर पढ़ी है वही सब आपको मिलेंगी इसमें, obviously with some extra data. So again the same thing in which they are talking that share of private non-financial corporations in overall gross fixed capital formation has increased by just 0.8% between financial year 2019 to financial year 2023. So you can imagine 2019 के बाद से कितना ही capital expenditure इन्होंने increase किया है, where the public capital expenditure is being more. So what these people are saying, please do this thing more. Next is revenue expenditure. Capital expenditure वाले section में किसी को कोई दिक्कत? What are the three to four things that you're gonna write? apart from total expenditure, apart from the expenditure growth of private non-financial corporation, and then talking about 3-4 themes within the capital expenditure domain. चलो आगे बढ़े. Next is revenue expenditure growth remains restrained, and this is the common theme that we've seen previously also. Government has been consistently reducing its revenue expenditure so that it have more room for doing capital expenditure. और वो हम लोगों ने ट्रेंड देखा था, कंसिस्टेंटली ऐसे ऐसे रिड्यूस होते जा रहा था हर साल साल. And if you look at little bit in depth in the revenue expenditure, you have interest payments, you have subsidies as the most important section, जहां पर सबसे ज्यादा पैसा जाता है. So if you see, even though the expenditure on the interest payments is lower than the budgeted, मतलब जितना बजट किया था उससे कम है, but still 30.4% of the total revenue expenditure is being done on interest payments. तो आप लोग इमेजिन कर सकते हो कितना सरकार डेट सर्विसिंग पे कॉस्ट देती है. Then expenditure on major subsidies this year declined by 22.1%, which is very huge. Interest payment, even though it was lower than the budgeted, still constitutes 30.4% of total revenue expenditure. And in terms of subsidies, which is the second most component, उन्होंने बोला कि it declined by 22.1% on a year-on-year basis. पिछले साल से 22.1% decline कर गई because of two main reasons. Government reduced subsidy in context of fertilizers as well as food subsidy. तो आप इनकी इंडिविजुअल भले याद करें ना करें, ये 22.1 वाली जरूर याद कर लें. ठीक है. Any confusion in revenue expenditure to anyone? Rohit, there are 13 chapters of economic survey, but not all chapters are so much important for RBI. Some chapters are so much important, some chapters are little bit less important. For example, the second chapter is highly important for RBI because it is about monetary management and financial intermediation. Shivam, this PDF is available in the course. In areas where government charges high taxes, such as in automotive and sports and community and all expenditure. So you can quote this example in what? Challenges, हाँ ठीक है, yes. चले आगे बढ़े. Next is overview of state government finances. If you look at it, तो आप broad idea लेके चलिए कि these finances are also improving. Two main things. First of all, they are reducing consistently their fiscal deficit. Second, even their expenditure quality is also improving. Whenever we talk about expenditure quality, that means we are talking about these entities doing what kind of expenditure? Anyone? जब आप expenditure quality की बात करते हो, तो कोई भी entity किस तरीके की expenditure कर रहा होगा ज्यादा? कौन बताना चाहेगा? Is it the revenue expenditure or the capital expenditure? Anyone? Yes, Shivam, Zach, correct. Capital expenditure, naturally. So ye broad दो themes लेके चलो, because themes, understanding themes is important for you to remember the data as well. Data को isolated sense में याद करोगे, याद नहीं रहेगा, बार बार क्रैम करना पड़ेगा. Themes याद रहेगी कि fiscal deficit improve हुआ था और क्या कहते हैं कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर भी ज्यादा कर रहे हैं. सो यू कैन सी 23 states data was collected. Okay, their gross fiscal deficit was 8.6% lower than the budgeted figure of 9.1 lakh crore. तो ये तो बजटेड फिगर के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में इतना परसेंट कम था. और इन टर्म्स ऑफ जीडीपी अगर आप चेक करोगे तो इट इज राइट नाउ स्टैंडिंग एट 2.8% एज अगेंस्ट द बजटेड ऑफ 3.1%. तो ये 23 स्टेट्स का अगर हम लोग बजट करके चेक करें कि इन्होंने अपने अपने फिस्कल डेफिसिट को कितना बजट करके चला, तो 3.1% केम आउट टू बी द बजटेड फिस्कल डेफिसिट. एंड इन रियलिटी व्हाट हैपेंड? 2.8% हैपेंड. So that means they reduced their fiscal deficit as well. So first of all, reduction इन्होंने किया. Next thing is the quality of spending also improved because they focused on capex as well. Okay. The union government transfers to the states are also highly progressive. With state with lower GSDP receives higher transfer from central government. Okay. Just like how Finance Commission usually provides a criteria in context of that. तो Finance Commission में ऐसा कौन सा criteria है in horizontal devolution which is similar to union government, कि मतलब जिसकी per capita income कम है उसको ज्यादा मिलेगा. What is the name of that criteria in Finance Commission? Anyone? इसके 13 पार्ट हैं रोहित. Bhargav, 5 PDFs are uploaded in the course up till chapter 5 as of today. Anyone? अरे इनकम डिस्टेंस भूल गए आप लोग. One of the criteria in Finance Commission. नाम सुन के तो आई होप याद आया होगा. इनकम डिस्टेंस. चलो. Next is general government debt. So general government debt to GDP ratio increased slightly in 2024 despite a declining primary deficit. So that is a broad trend, but still you can see debt is in control. And why debt is in control? Why we have a little bit better situation in context of debt despite a lot of countries in global, various global countries we've seen कि उनके पास डेट बहुत ज्यादा होता जा रहा है क्योंकि उन्होंने बोरोइंग बहुत ज्यादा कर ली थी. इंडियन गवर्नमेंट पे इतना ज्यादा डेट का प्रेशर क्यों नहीं है? इफ यू सी द रीजन इज बिकॉज वी हैव लो शेयर ऑफ एक्सटर्नल डेट. All of us understand that external debt comes not only with financial obligations, but it also comes with the inherent exchange rate risk. अगर डॉलर में आपने लिया, डॉलर कर गया एप्रिशिएट, तो आपको डेट सर्विसिंग ज्यादा बढ़ गई, कॉस्ट ऑफ डेट सर्विसिंग इंक्रीजेस. बट बिकॉज वी डू नॉट हैव दैट मच अमाउंट ऑफ एक्सटर्नल डेट, वी आर relatively safe. Most of our debt is from domestic only and also denominated in rupees only. Next is the gradual elongation of the maturity profile of the union government is also leading to reduced rollover risk. So think about, and this is a basic thing for all of you, अगर गवर्नमेंट डेट की मैच्योरिटी on an average is less than 5 years or more than 10 years, which is beneficial? Anyone? Is it A or is it B? Yes, so all those people who are saying B, they are correct. क्योंकि अगर हमारा सबसे पूरा डेट अगर उसकी एवरेज 5 साल है, मतलब 5 साल में आपको पूरा डेट देना पड़ेगा. दैट मीन्स यू हैव अ लॉट मोर ऑब्लिगेशंस इन कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ दैट. इंटरेस्ट पेमेंट के साथ साथ प्रिंसिपल का भी आपको रीपेमेंट जल्दी देना पड़ेगा, तो आपको उसके लिए प्रोविजनिंग बनानी पड़ेगी. फिर आपके पास पैसे कैसे बचेंगे फॉर डूइंग कैपिटल एक्सपेंडिचर एंड ऑल दोस थिंग्स. So elongation of the maturity profile reduce rollover risk. Okay, so that's what the idea is. Again, so that's why if you see the weighted average maturity of the outstanding stock of dated securities comes out to be 12.5 years by the end of March 2024. So please remember this thing and low share of external debt. So this is the broad themes in the union government debt. Any confusion in this to anyone? आगे बढ़े, चलो नेक्स्ट थिंग इज, सो वी ऑल्सो गॉट द बूस्ट फ्रॉम इंटरनेशनल रेटिंग्स एजेंसी. नाम क्या है इस रेटिंग एजेंसी का? S&P ग्लोबल रेटिंग्स, which recently upgraded India's sovereign outlook from stable to positive in May 2024. अब इससे फायदे क्या क्या होंगे? Anyone? So whenever any international agency improves rating of India's sovereign, और स्पेसिफिकली ये यूजुअली गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में होता है, तो इससे होगा क्या? एनीवन? लॉजिक अगर आप लगाएं, कॉज एंड इफेक्ट प्योरली, अगर आपने जैसे किसी भी क्रेडिट रेटिंग एजेंसी ने बोल दिया कि ये वाला जो गवर्नमेंट डेट है विच इज वेरी मच स्टेबल, पॉजिटिव, आपको रेट भी अच्छा देगा और इट इज स्टेबल ऑल्सो, तो नेचुरली एवरीबडी विल बी लाइक खरीदो इसको, जितना दबा खरीद सकते हो उतना खरीद लो, ठीक है. एंड व्हेनेवर दैट थिंग हैपेंस, whenever there is an increased demand for government bonds or government securities, what will happen to the price and what will happen to the yield? Everyone tell me, क्या होगा? Yes, Ritik, correct. The yield will reduce और इनवर्स रिलेशनशिप है, प्राइस विल इंक्रीज, डिमांड बढ़ेगा तो प्राइस बढ़ेगा ही बढ़ेगा और फिर यील्ड रिड्यूस हो जाएगा, करेक्ट. So in this case, if you see, whenever yield reduce, that means interest rate reduce हो गई, है ना. तो जब इंटरेस्ट रेट रिड्यूस हुई, एट दी एंड तो ये गवर्नमेंट की सिक्योरिटी है विच इज गवर्नमेंट डेट ओनली. तो जब लेस इंटरेस्ट रेट है तो गवर्नमेंट के डेट ऑब्लिगेशंस विल आल्सो बी रिड्यूसिंग और इंक्रीजिंग, या कॉस्ट ऑफ डेट सर्विसिंग, व्हाट विल हैपन? एनीवन? इंटरेस्ट रेट रिड्यूस करेगा तो गवर्नमेंट का कॉस्ट ऑफ डेट विल आल्सो रिड्यूस. बहुत बढ़िया. सो वी विल, और आप सबको पता है, ऑल ऑफ यू अंडरस्टैंड कि गवर्नमेंट की जो ट्रेजरी बिल्स की इंटरेस्ट रेट्स है, अ लॉट ऑफ बैंक्स यूटिलाइज दीज एज अ बेंचमार्क इंटरेस्ट रेट्स. ये क्लियर है सबको? ये तो आप, हाउ मेनी ऑफ यू नो अबाउट दिस? अ लॉट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट सिक्योरिटीज इंटरेस्ट रेट इज आल्सो यूटिलाइज एज अ बेंचमार्क इंटरेस्ट रेट फॉर डिफरेंट प्रोडक्ट्स, है ना. तो आप हिसाब लगाओ कि ये अगर इंटरेस्ट रेट बिकॉज ऑफ दैट रेटिंग चेंज अगर रिड्यूस कर रहा है, तो पूरे जो मार्केट में लोन्स हो जाएंगे उनका इंटरेस्ट रेट का क्या होगा? दोज विल ऑल्सो गो फर्दर डाउन. तो एक तरीके से जस्ट बिकॉज ऑफ दैट इवेंट फ्रॉम स्टेबल टू पॉजिटिव, आरबीआई को कुछ करना नहीं पड़ा. इट वॉज लाइक अ न्यू, क्या कहते हैं, इट एक्ट्स लाइक अ रेट कट, इवन दो आरबीआई डिडंट डू एनीथिंग टेक्निकली, मतलब टेक्निकली नॉट अ रेट कट, बट सब्सटैंशियली इट इज लाइक अ रेट कट ओनली. आपके इंटरेस्ट रेट रिड्यूस हो गए. एनी कंफ्यूजन इन दिस टू एनीवन? आप लोगों को क्लियर समझ में आया कि किस किस से क्या क्या चीजें हुई? So that's what the whole paragraph is all about. So think about, for the first time in 13 years it was changed from stable to positive. Okay, so it says that if that were to happen, India's 10-year benchmark bond yield will drop up to 30 to 50 basis points, or this drop will reduce borrowing cost, and it will also cause interest rate to decline, and it would also lead to overall lower cost of borrowing for households as well and businesses as well. So technically it would be like a fiscal stimulus in itself, even though government as well as Reserve Bank of India didn't do anything. I hope everybody can at least write about this in the exam also. अगर एग्जाम में अगर आपको पूछा जाए कि how such kind of rating change benefits India, तो आप केवल गवर्नमेंट बॉन्ड के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में नहीं, ओवरऑल इकोनॉमी के फिस्कल स्टिमुलस के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में भी लिख सकते हैं. नहीं, क्राउडिंग आउट ऑफ प्राइवेट इन्वेस्टमेंट तो तब होगा ना. नहीं, क्यों होगा? क्राउडिंग आउट कब होता है? जब गवर्नमेंट पैसा ज्यादा उठा रही होती है. गवर्नमेंट को रिक्वायरमेंट ही नहीं है उतने पैसे की, तो क्राउडिंग आउट कैसे हो जाएगा? और गवर्नमेंट पैसा कब उठाती है? जब उसका फिस्कल डेफिसिट बहुत ज्यादा बड़ा होता है, बिकॉज वी आर टोटली इन कंट्रोल इन कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ फिस्कल कंसोलिडेशन. सो व्हाई वुड गवर्नमेंट बी आस्किंग फॉर मोर मनी फ्रॉम द डोमेस्टिक मार्केट ओनली? और प्राइवेट बिजनेसेस को तो सस्ता मिल रहा है, उससे तो इन्वेस्टमेंट्स और बढ़ेंगे. ठीक है, चल. एनी कंफ्यूजन इन दिस पैराग्राफ टू एनीवन? ऊपर वाले में चलो. नेक्स्ट इज मॉडरेशन इन इन्फ्लेशनरी प्रेशर्स. सो यू कैन सी, और सिंपल सी बात है, पिछले साल between 2022 and 2023 there were a lot of events that led to supply chain disruption, which further led to increase in commodity price as well as inflationary conditions in the economy. And there were a lot of steps taken by the government of India as well as the Reserve Bank of India to reduce the inflationary pressures, and all those pressures led to reduction in inflation. That's what the survey is telling you about. So survey is telling you about what were the steps taken by the government of India, what were the steps taken by the Reserve Bank of India, and what were the impact of that in context of inflation only. Shivam, you can attribute this reason also. मतलब आप इसको एक रीजन मान सकते हैं, बट यूजुअली वो एक रीजन नहीं होता, बहुत सारे रीजन होते हैं. गवर्नमेंट की फाइनेंसेस आर आल्सो गुड, और उनकी डेट पेमेंट टाइमलाइंस आर आल्सो गुड, तो वो एक्स्ट्रा रीजन होते हैं. देयर इज नॉट नेवर सिंगल रीजन फॉर एनीथिंग. So union government took these type of initiatives in context of inflation: open market sales, retailing in specified outlets, ठीक है, नाफेड से बिचवा दिया, किसी और से बिचवा दिया, timely imports of commodities so that adequate supply is there, जिससे supply based inflation ना हो, reduce the prices of LPG cylinders, at least gas based inflation, और also implemented a cut in petrol and diesel prices. क्योंकि रिटेल इन्फ्लेशन तो होता ही है कम, ठीक है, उसके साथ साथ इट विल ऑल्सो रिड्यूस कोर इन्फ्लेशन एज वेल, क्योंकि इट इज वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट इनपुट कॉस्ट एज वेल. So these were the steps taken by the government of India in context of inflation. And what did Reserve Bank of India did? Obviously, it increases the policy rate by 250 basis point, or you can say 2.5% between May 2022 till February 2023. Feb 2023 क्यों बोल रहे हैं, जबकि ऑलरेडी हम लोग जुलाई 2024 में. एनीवन? नहीं, फाइनेंशियल 24 नहीं, मतलब फाइनेंशियल 24 का इसमें रेलेवेंस क्या है? February 2023 के बाद कोई रेट बढ़ा ही नहीं, वो 6.5 का 6.5% वैसे का वैसे ही पड़ा हुआ है, इवन टुडे ऑल्सो. सो दैट्स व्हाई इंक्रीज हैपेंड फ्रॉम May 2022 टू February 2023. उसके बाद से द रेट became constant only. Yes, Zach, correct. All of you, correct. बहुत बढ़िया. ठीक है, इसीलिए ये टाइमलाइन जानना भी जरूरी है. Please remember that. Even though you know the rate is same, but up till what month and what year the rate continuously increased, you guys should know about it. Okay, so make sure you remember that this broad timeline, and obviously कि कितना increase किया from 4 to 6.5%. That means 2.5% का increase or 250 basis points. Next is impact of these steps. Retail inflation came out to be 5.4% in financial year 24. This was the impact. Okay? Another impact was India was the only country among its peers to, navigate a high growth and low inflation path in the financial year 22 to 24 period. Very much important. So if you are doing these retail inflation, data only, तो देखो पिछले साल का तो ये 5.4% आ गया. What is the projection by Reserve Bank of India for financial year 25 CPI? Anyone? रोहित, इसके चैप्टर 11 अपलोड होंगे, ठीक है, और लेक्चर्स विल आल्सो बी लाइक 12 to 13 लेक्चर्स. कोर्स में 11 चैप्टर, मतलब कोर्स और लेक्चर्स यूट्यूब पे सारे रहेंगे, उसमें आपको टेंशन लेने की जरूरत नहीं. और चैप्टर as a PDF will also 11 PDF will be uploaded. Oh, sorry, 13 PDF. I'm sorry, 13 PDFs will be uploaded because there are 13 chapters only. Yes, Ritik, Shivam, all of you are correct. 4.5% का projection है in financial year 25 by Reserve Bank of India. ठीक है? Now let's move on to the financial system, which economic survey is also at least agreeing upon that it stays resilient, and the idea or the data on the basis of which Reserve Bank, economic survey is saying this is the financial stability report highlights. In financial stability report, you must have seen this. The asset quality has also improved with respect to SCBs, scheduled commercial banks, with gross NPA ratio declining to 2.8%. सबका मिला के. The system-wide capital to risk-weighted asset ratio, capital adequacy ratio declined marginally by 37 basis points or 0.37. ये इससे decline कर गया था because there were recent some changes in context of capital to risk-weighted asset ratio. But इतना decline करने के बाद it still is well above whatever the capital adequacy ratio is for SCBs. Next is the profitability of scheduled commercial banks also remains steady, with return on equity being 13.8% and return on assets being 1.3%. And if you see the macro stress tests, मतलब वो basically बहुत सारे सिनारियो को प्ले करते हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल एक कोई फाइनेंशियल इंस्टेबिलिटी हो गई, तो अगर इस तरीके की कोई कंटिजेंसी होती है, हाउ वुड द बैंक्स परफॉर्म? And the result was that SCBs would be able to comply with minimum capital requirement even under severe stress scenarios. Very much important. ठीक है, हमारे बैंक्स की हालत ठीक है. These kind of data, these kind of reports gives confidence within the Indian financial system. Next thing is proactive regulatory actions. So I was discussing to you about regarding increasing risk weight, है ना? तो उस केस में you can see the consumer credit exposure for banks as well as NBFCs will attract a risk weight of 125% compared to 100%. So this was the change that we were discussing पहले, और ये हम लोग current affairs में भी discuss कर रखे हैं. Again the same thing, whatever you have we have discussed will come again in the survey. The risk weight for credit card loans by the banks will be 150%, or NBFCs will be 125% risk weight. So this you need to remember. Feasibility, so obviously, primarily they wanted to do because of high inflation, increased volatility in the food inflation domain. That's why the idea was to remove. But obviously there can be two things. Obviously there can be for arguments against arguments. अगर आपके एग्जाम में आता भी है तो you need to write both only. और फिर एक balanced opinion if you can give in that context, that would help. Next is India's external sector. So external sector में we'll be talking about the trade aspect, FDI, FPI and all those things. So trade के context में if you see service exports have remained robust, reaching a new high of $341.1 billion. If you see the total exports, it grew by 0.15%. Total imports declined by 4.9%. Okay? Total exports increased by 0.15%. Total imports reduced by 4.9%. Net private transfers, or what we call remittances, mostly remittances, came out to be $106.6 billion in financial year 25. Similar, a little bit subset data you must have seen in the global migration report. उसके अंदर remittances का data भी पड़ा होगा. And the current account deficit, came out to be 0.7% of the GDP. So please make sure that you remember these data. पहले चैप्टर से दूसरे चैप्टर से कोई भी डेटा आप लोग मिस मत करिएगा. Very much important. Then we see foreign investment trends. So net FPI flows, portfolio investment, stood at $44.1 billion during financial year 24. Whereas net FDI inflows, अंदर बाहर से अंदर आने वाला पैसा in terms of FDI declined to $26.5 billion in financial year 24. And if you see the data of gross FDI inflows, it only moderated by 0.6%. मतलब पहले जितना बाहर से आ रहा था उतने वैल्यू में केवल 0.6% का डिक्लाइन है. तो फिर वैल्यू इतनी रिड्यूस क्यों गई फ्रॉम 42 टू 26.5? तो आपको पता होना चाहिए कि नेट में ग्रॉस इनफ्लोज के अलावा एक और कंपोनेंट होगा which is actually reducing this whole value to 26.5, and which is what? Anyone? मतलब इनफ्लोज तो आपके पिछले साल जितने आते थे उससे केवल 0.6% रिडक्शन हुआ, बट उसके बाद नेट एफडीआई इनफ्लोज 44 से 26 कैसे होगा? एनीवन? यस ऋतिक, करेक्ट, आउटफ्लो भी हुआ. तो ऋतिक इसको एक काम करेंगे ना, ये सर्वे में दोबारा आएगा ही. इट इज इन द आई गेस द नेक्स्ट चैप्टर और द नेक्स्ट टू नेक्स्ट चैप्टर. वहां पर हम लोग इसको डिस्क्रिप्टिव में कॉम्प्रिहेंसिवली वील डिस्कस इट अगेन. Yes, because of the outflow of the FDI also, it declined. Next is Forex Reserves. If you see, it is sufficient to cover 11 months of projected imports and more than 100% of the total external debt, which is a very good condition. Except BOP crisis. BOP crisis के टाइम पे हमारे पास कितने दिन का था import cover, if any one of you remember? किसी को याद है पर हाउ मेनी डेज ऑफ इंपोर्ट कवर वी वर रिड्यूस टू ड्यूरिंग बीओपी क्राइसिस? मतलब एटलीस्ट टेक अ गेस. यस शिवम, 21 दिन का इंपोर्ट कवर बचा हुआ था. Some stats also say 14 week, 14 days. अलग अलग है. खैर, but 21 is usually in the books. Next is India's external debt. As a मतलब external debt to GDP ratio is at the lower level of 18.7%. And the ratio of foreign exchange reserves to total debt stood at 97.4%. Next is reduction in macro vulnerability. Because recently the fiscal deficit, the government is expected to reduce it up to 4.5% by financial year 26. This is reflected in downward trajectory of macroeconomic vulnerability of India. कुछ नहीं, इसमें बस आपको ट्रेंड याद करके चलना है. अगर वहां पर क्वेश्चन आया, they'll be asking you trend based question in which they can give you a statement that macroeconomic vulnerability of India is increasing as per economic survey, which is a false. Logic से भी वो आंसर हो जाएगा because all of you have seen such strong macroeconomic indicators. और ये ग्राफ तो एनीवेज बता ही रहा है, डिक्लाइनिंग macro vulnerability index. So this is strengthening the statistical system, not so much important for you. ठीक है, अभी के लिए in terms of objective. Descriptive में आप लोग इसको देख लेना, then we can again discuss it again. Objective के लिए right now you can leave it, no issues. Next is inclusive growth. So primarily this is the first thing that you need to remember, that what the government approaches in context of inclusive growth from an input based approach to outcome based empowerment. ठीक है, मतलब इतना पैसा खर्च करेंगे, उतना पैसा खर्च करेंगे, इससे मतलब नहीं है. आपका जो खर्चा हो रहा है उससे कितने लोग पॉवर्टी से बाहर आ रहे हैं, कितने लोगों को पानी का टैप वाटर मिल रहा है, कितने लोगों को ये सारी ग्रोथ मिल रही है. दैट बिकम्स इंपॉर्टेंट. सो द फोकस changed from input to output or outcome based. Next thing is saturation of basic necessities has been recognized as imperative to achieve this, thus impelling an array of flagship initiatives. What do we mean by saturation of basic necessities? Anyone? और ये saturation of basic necessities आप poverty में हम लोग एक approach पढ़ते हैं. What is that approach? That can come in concurrence with this saturation of basic necessities approach. Saturation of basic necessities मतलब कि basic necessities को मतलब आप इतना fulfill कर दो कि उसकी दिक्कत ना रहे. So that's what the idea of poverty is. Poverty is what? Absolute poverty is that you do not have minimum money to fund your minimum basic needs. That's what the absolute poverty is all about. तो उसी को खत्म करना चाहती है सरकार via this approach, saturation of basic necessities. That's why you have a lot of different flagship schemes. For example, Ayushman Bharat, Swachh Bharat, Awas Yojana, and others. Okay, so the approach also involves targeted implementation of reforms for the last mile service delivery. So whenever you will talk about inclusive growth, आप लोगों के लिए ये हो गया philosophical basis और let's say the idea behind what is government doing. तो ये approaches हो गए, ये आपके government steps हो गए, which all of you anyways knows: aspirational district, vibrant village, Viksit Bharat, digitization, direct benefit transfer, Jan Dhan Yojana. All of you anyways knows this. All of you can anyways quote this, but if you can quote these things also in your descriptive answers, gives a much better impact in your answers and also gives you much more marks as compared to the competitors who haven't written this. Okay, Then in context of employment, what is the situation here? So as per annual PLFS data, all India annual unemployment rate has been declining since the pandemic. And from the gender perspective also, the female labor force participation rate has increased from 23.3 to 37%. Still is very much below as compared to male labor force participation rate, which is equal to how much? Anyone? मेल लेबर फोर्स पार्टिसिपेशन रेट कितना चल रहा है? एनी रफ आइडिया? नॉट 57%, इतना कम थोड़ा है. यू नो इट इज मोर देन 75% ओनली. एग्जैक्ट फिगर आप लोग चेक कर लेना, बट 75 के आसपास का है. नेक्स्ट इज पॉवर्टी. सो पॉवर्टी एज अगेन whatever you've discussed in the chapter of poverty, whatever we guys have discussed in the chapter of poverty, आप उस chapter of poverty में सर्वे का डेटा कहाँ यूज कर सकते हैं, उस चीज को फोकस कर रहा है. As a result of systemic focus on addressing individual deprivations, the incidence of poverty has reduced remarkably, and which is reflected in steep decline in head count ratio of multidimensionally poor between 15-16 to 23 as per नीति आयोग. ये डेटा आपको नीति आयोग की एमडीपीआई इंडेक्स में मिल ही जाएगा. द मंथली पर कैपिटा कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर ऑल्सो इंक्रीज्ड, विच वी सीन इन द करंट अफेयर्स डॉक्यूमेंट ऑल्सो. तो जितना आपने करंट अफेयर्स में पढ़ा वही सब इन्होंने एक सिंपल सेंटेंस में लिख दिया. आप सबको पता था कि कितने लोग पॉवर्टी से बाहर आए या कितना हेडकाउंट रेशियो रिड्यूस कर गया. आप सबको पता था कि हाउस होल्ड कंजम्पशन एक्सपेंडिचर इन रूरल एज वेल एज इन अर्बन एरियाज बोथ हैव इंक्रीज्ड. और उसके डेटा के हिसाब से ऑल ऑफ यू अंडरस्टूड कि पॉवर्टी रेट डिक्लाइन कर गया है. वही सेम बात इन्होंने यहां लिख दी है. तो नया क्या लिखा है? ठीक है, तो इसलिए परेशान नहीं होना विद रिस्पेक्ट टू अ लॉट ऑफ कंटेंट दैट यू गाइस सीइंग इन द इकोनॉमिक सर्वे. सो नाउ कम्स द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट पार्ट, विच इज द आउटलुक which economic survey is telling you about on the basis of all these data. मेन थिंग हम लोग को क्या याद करके रखना है कि इकोनॉमिक सर्वे का प्रोजेक्शन फॉर रियल जीडीपी ऑफ फाइनेंशियल ईयर 25 इज 6.5 to 7%. So that's the main thing that we need to remember, amongst other things obviously. Okay, so this is all about the first chapter. किसी को कोई दिक्कत? Does anybody have any confusion with respect to whatever we have discussed till now? नहीं तो उसकी टेंशन लेने वाली बात ही नहीं है. वहां पर जब आप एग्जाम दोगे ना तो आप गलत नहीं करोगे. ठीक है, तो उसकी टेंशन ना लो. वो बस हम लोग वो सारे डेटा के बारे में एक बार में सोचने की कोशिश करते हैं, तो हमको लगता है कि पता नहीं क्या क्या कौन कौन सा क्या पढ़ा है ना. बट इन द एग्जाम इट विल डेफिनेटली हेल्प यू. और आपको इसका इफ यू वांट टू सी इट इन टर्म्स ऑफ मतलब इन प्रैक्टिकल सेंस, आप मॉक्स लगा के देखो, आपको कंफ्यूजन नहीं दिखेगी. यस महर्षि, व्हाट अबाउट सोशल जस्टिस? See, in the next class, we'll be starting with chapter 2. I would recommend every one of you to please go and see this chapter on your own. कुछ नहीं है, वही सेम डेटा जो आप लोग ऑलरेडी पढ़ चुके हो वही डेटा है. ठीक है, जो जो मैंने इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर डिस्क्रिप्टिव दे रखा है यू कैन इग्नोर एज ऑफ नाउ, बट उसके अलावा जितना भी डेटा आपको येलो हाईलाइट में दिख रहा है एटलीस्ट उन सब के नोट्स तो बना के रखिए, सो दैट यू कैन अगेन रिवाइज इट whenever we'll discuss it in the class. ठीक है? And from RBI perspective, this is the most important chapter for the exam. ठीक है? नाबार्ड के परस्पेक्टिव से एग्रीकल्चर वाला चैप्टर, क्लाइमेट चेंज, रूरल डेवलपमेंट, एम्प्लॉयमेंट, वो ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाते हैं. आरबीआई के सेंस में दिस बिकम्स द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट चैप्टर. तो प्लीज मेक श्योर कि आप लोग इसका 2, 3, 4, 5 बार रिवाइज करके चले. This will help you immensely. ठीक है? Any other confusion? And if there is no confusion, we'll wind up this session. Chalo. Thank you guys for joining. We'll meet in the next session. We'll then keep revising these content. Your exam is coming very soon. ठीक है? Every second counts. और अपने हेल्थ का ध्यान इस समय बड़े रखिएगा आप लोग. ठीक है? Do not stress out. And that's what I would recommend to everyone. Thank you.